Welcome to TAL's World of Warplanes Tier 6 aircraft comparison. Click the timestamps in the YouTube description to quickly skip to an aircraft, or use the icons on the screen. Some of the ratings given to aircraft stats may change with patches or be different in your opinion, but the information here should give you a good idea of what to expect of each aircraft. Let's get started and hope my throat won't go sore. The Yakolev 1M is a low-altitude light fighter. It is the most maneuverable aircraft in the game with an extreme rate of roll and turn rate. The damage of its guns is low, but they don't overheat quickly. While flying this aircraft, abuse your extreme maneuverability by trying to get enemies into a turn fight with you at low altitude. Due to your low altitude, you will be very vulnerable to boom and zoom tactics, although your extreme maneuverability makes it easy to dodge incoming attacks. The Yakolev Yak-9 is a low-altitude fighter. It's pretty much a Yak-1M with a huge cannon mounted in front. This gives the Yak-9 devastating firepower, especially compared to other low-altitude aircraft. However, you're not as maneuverable as other low-altitude aircraft and will need help to outmaneuver them. Also, the cannon has a very slow rate of fire and extreme overheating, which means you will need to fire at short range and make every bullet count. Being a low-altitude aircraft means you're very vulnerable to boom and zoom attacks. The Mitsubishi A6M50 is a low-altitude light fighter. It has an extremely good turn rate and a very decent set of guns. It does however lack a good engine and its rate of roll is pretty bad. You should fly this aircraft by abusing your amazing turn rate and your powerful guns. You will be very vulnerable to boom and zoom attacks from high altitude, and you might have some trouble dodging them due to your low rate of roll. The Lavochkin LA-5 is a low to medium altitude light fighter. It is very maneuverable and has a pretty decent set of cannons. While the aircraft has an extremely good rate of roll, it doesn't have as great turn rate as the lowest altitude aircraft. Against the lowest altitude aircraft, you should abuse your higher altitude and use vertical maneuvers. You should try to lure medium and high altitude aircraft to lower altitudes and defeat them in a turn fight. You're still very vulnerable to boom and zoom attacks of the highest altitude aircraft, although your amazing rate of roll makes you pretty good at dodging them. The Chance Ford F4U-1 Corsair is a medium to high altitude light fighter. It is a very decent all-round aircraft with an exceptional engine with a long boost duration. Its cannons are short range and overheat quickly but deal a very decent punch. It is however slightly vulnerable to boom and zoom attacks because without its boost it won't be able to keep up with high altitude aircraft. You should fly this aircraft like the hybrid it is. Use boom and zoom against low altitude aircraft and try to lure high altitude aircraft down to your altitude where you can defeat them in a turn fight. The Supermarine Spitfire V is a medium altitude light fighter. It is a very balanced jack-of-all-trades aircraft. It has a pretty good turn rate and a very decent set of guns. Due to the combination of cannons and machine guns, you'll have a strong burst and then some decent sustained damage while the cannons are overheated. It does however slightly lack in its rate of roll. You should fly this aircraft as a hybrid, luring high altitude aircraft to get a turning fight at your altitude and using boom and zoom tactics against low altitude aircraft. You are still very vulnerable to boom and zoom attacks from the highest altitude aircraft. The Focke-Wulf FW-190A5 is a medium to high altitude light fighter. It has the highest firepower of all light fighters in the game and has an extremely good rate of roll. However, due to its extremely low turn rate, it flies slightly like a heavy fighter and you won't be able to turn fight any light fighter. Fly this aircraft exclusively as a boom and zoomer and use your massive firepower to quickly dispatch your enemies. Fly this aircraft exclusively as a boom and zoomer and use your massive firepower to quickly dispatch your enemies. Use your amazing rate of roll to barrel roll away instead of turning. The North American P-51A Mustang is a high-altitude light fighter. It is an extremely maneuverable fighter with a great rate of roll and turn rate. The damage of its guns are low, but they don't overheat quickly. Fly this aircraft as a boom and zoomer against low-altitude aircraft and outturn enemies at high altitude with your great maneuverability. The Messerschmitt Bf-109F Friedrich is a very high-altitude light fighter. It has the option to unequip its extra cannons to further improve its maneuverability at the cost of firepower. Both in the heavy and the light configuration its maneuverability is pretty good, and in the heavy setup its firepower is very good as well. It is a very powerful boom and zoom aircraft and maneuverable enough to turn fight other high altitude aircraft. The Messerschmitt Me-410 Hornisse is a high altitude heavy fighter. It is the heavy fighter with the highest firepower and a good set of hit points. It is however the least maneuverable aircraft in the game after the ground attack aircraft. Use exclusively boom and zoom attacks with this aircraft and use your superior firepower to demolish enemies in a frontal attack. The de Havilland 98 Mosquito is a high altitude heavy fighter. The Mosquito has a pretty good turn rate for a heavy fighter and decent firepower. However, its low health makes it inefficient to go in a frontal attack with other heavy fighters. Use this aircraft's maneuverability to outmaneuver other heavy aircraft and its powerful firepower to go in frontal attacks with light fighters. Don't try to turn fight light fighters, only use boom and zoom against them. The Lockheed P-38J Lightning is a high altitude heavy fighter. It is the aircraft with the highest optimum altitude in the game, and it is a very good rate of roll for a heavy fighter. It does however lack some firepower compared to other heavy aircraft. Use this aircraft's optimum altitude to boom and zoom enemies and use its decent maneuverability to try and outmaneuver other heavies, or use your rate of roll to barrel roll and dodge their fire. Don't go frontal with other heavy fighters since your firepower is greatly inferior. The Ilyushin IL-2 two-seat is the only ground attack aircraft on Tier 6. Being a ground attack aircraft means it has increased camouflage. It also has the highest firepower available in the game. It does however have an extremely bad turn rate, rate of roll and optimum altitude. The extreme firepower makes this aircraft specialized in attacking ground targets. Use this aircraft's increased camouflage combined with a paint job to get to the enemy base unnoticed by flying extremely low to the ground. You can use bombs to attempt to kill enemies on your tail. That's all 13 of them. I hope this video was useful for you. To read the script of the video in text, click the link in the YouTube description. Happy hunting!